in my youth as a very young man. And my father used to take us to see Gedolim Yisrael. We were very, very young. We were 8, 9, 10, 11 years old. He felt there was a need, even if we didn't understand what they're saying, but let's just see the Rabbeim in front of you and see their virtues and see their pluses and see what they bring to the table and try your best to see what you can do to emulate that. And that's essentially what we did to a large extent. And as a result, as a very, very young man already, I began that kind of connection with the Gedolim Yisrael.
Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Be'in podcast. So today I had the absolute zuchus to sit down with somebody who is a tremendous mentor in my life and somebody that I've looked up to for years, and that is the Rosh Yeshiva of Yeshivat Shraga, Rabbi Avishai David. I have to preface, before you guys actually see this episode on YouTube or wherever you're watching this, is that the camera that I was using to film the episode, film the entire thing, and the portable charger that I was using to fuel the camera died 2 minutes before the episode was over. And unfortunately, thank you to Apple, the video gets lost in oblivion. So for this episode, it's a little bit unconventional. You guys will hear the audio and the camera will switch to me as I am talking, but the content is still the same. It's still absolutely amazing. We got very deep on Rabbi David's life and also the idea about working hard in your Judaism and Yiddishkeit, and it was just awesome. So get ready for this week's episode. Shout out to Noble Custom Suits for being the sponsor of this video, and without further ado, it's time to listen to my episode with Rabbi Avishai David. Welcome to the Israel Gap Year Be'in podcast. I'm your host, Avi Proctor, and in each episode, we get Be'in in depth into the remarkable lives of individuals in Israel who dedicate themselves to inspiring the next generation of Klal Yisrael. First of all, Rabbi David, thank you so much for joining and coming all the way here with me today.
You're most welcome.
So there's so much I want to talk about today, specifically on the importance of working hard in your Judaism and Talmud Torah and whatnot, and I feel like the Rav is the perfect person to speak about this topic with. But before I get into those questions, if the Rav could give me a little bit of a background. I know it's hard to take a 50 or 60 year period in the Rav's life to kind of describe how we got here today, but could the Rav give me a little bit of a background on how the Rav grew up?
I grew up under the tutelage of my wonderful parents, my mother and father, Aleichem Hashalom, in the Bronx, New York, a borough that probably today is not so well known, but then it was the hub of New York City in many, many respects before people moved to Brooklyn and Queens. As a matter of fact, probably the Bronx was, to a certain extent, undermined by virtue of two different factors. They built Co-op City. That was supposed to be the Geula for Klal Yisrael in Co-op City. And secondly, they built the Cross Bronx Expressway that drove a wedge in the Bronx, and more or less that undid the entire Bronx, but my parents remained there. I daven in many, many shuls in the Bronx. My father was a big chassid of Rabbanim, and my father had tremendous derech eretz for rabbis and Rabbanim. So I was zochet to meet as a very young man. I'm talking about from the age of 5, 6 years old when I began to daven b'tzibur in shul. My father was insistent that I daven b'tzibur, starting at that very young age. And so we met Rabbi Chilmich Chalap, Zechat Tzadik Livracha, the father of Zulun Chalap, who just recently passed away, the Menal of the Yeshiva, and he was the son of Rabbi Moshe Chalap, the famous Yerushalmi Tzaddik. And I was zocher, for example, Rabbi Chilmich Chalap. My father used to go on Shvi Shel Pesach, 12 o'clock at night, to sing Shir HaSayam with a special niggin that Rabbi Moshe Chalap developed here in Eretz Yisrael, and that was transmitted to his son, to his grandchildren, to his great-grandchildren. So he was among the many Rabbanim. My mother, Alei Shalom, when she had a shaila halacha, so she would get on the phone and call 3 Gedolim Yisrael. Who were they? The first was Hagoy Moshe Feinstein Zatzal. She spoke to him on a weekly basis. Number 2, if he wasn't available, Rav Henkin Zatzal. And number 3, if he wasn't available, Rav Moshe Big Zatzal. 3 literally Gedolim Olam. So I became familiar with these Gedolim Olam when I was 7, 8, 9, 10 years old. It's true, I grew up on Yiddish. I happen to speak Yiddish fluently. I understand Yiddish fluently, which helped me later on understand the shurim of my Rebbe, the Gadol Ador, Rav Soloveitchik Zatzal, Rabbi Yossi Dov Halevi Soloveitchik. So these were the Rabbanim that I was introduced to at a very young age. My father was very makpid to come on time. My father was very makpid not to talk during davening. My father davened very, very slowly. Each word was enunciated. My father held on to us. There was no such phenomena as exists today. The moment a Rav begins to speak, you simply split. You leave the scene as quickly as possible. Chas v'sholom, such a thing can never happen. And we used to stand up for Rabbanim. We stood up for anyone who came to speak publicly. That's my father's training, and my mother, La Shalom, actually was a really ideal kind of relationship, my mother and father. My father was a takifotzum, very strong person in his entire Hanhaga, and my mother was a soft person, so it's literally the Eza Kenegdo, as Chazal speak about, almost an ideal kind of relationship. But the way they lived, their entire Hanhaga, their incredible sense of tznius. My parents were tremendous Bali Tzedakah. They were Bali Chesed, Mufloim, really at the highest of levels. We had someone who happens to be brother-in-law of a very famous Adam Gadol, but he was not so well. He lived in our home for several years, literally, and we had to, all of us, three brothers, had to crowd into one room. There's a fourth brother, he had his own room, and my sister had her own room, but all of us together had to come together because of this achnas sarchem on the part of my parents. They felt very strongly about it. I remember they used to have all the envelopes for tzedakah on a weekly basis. They would spread them out on the table and put money in each envelope. Even though my father was a very simple working person, my father and mother never went to yeshiva a day in their lives. But they had tremendous sense of derech eretz, as I said, not just for Torah, Talmidei Chachamim, for Rabbanim. I have a number of stories I tell one, which is really a classic. When I grew up, I'm talking about in the 50s, so the Yankees, New York Yankees, were always in the World Series, of course. We were living in New York, the Bronx Bombers, as they call them, in Yankee Stadium. And often the seventh game of the World Series, which the Yankees were involved in quite often, turned out to be Yom Kippur. What a combination. So clearly there is a bit of a problem, shall we say, World Series and Yom Kippur. And the question is, which one takes precedence? I davened in a shul. The Rav was a very chashuv Talmid Chacham, wonderful person himself. But at the same time, most of the constituents were not observant, didn't come from Shomrei Shabbos, Shomrei Torah Mitzvahs homes, and therefore they were more interested in the World Series with the Yankees than, shall we say, the Avodah of Yom Kippur in the afternoon, which could be rather lengthy and rather humdrum and routinized and regimented, and I'll put it simply, somewhat boring relative to the excitement of the World Series. So at one point, the president of the shul decided there was a bar not far away from the shul, and the entire shul already was outside watching the screen, watching the Yankee ball game. And so the president became annoyed, and so he went to the bar and convinced the people to come back and told them, I'll keep you abreast of what's happening every once in a while. In the middle of the Avodah, he stops the Avodah of Yom Kippur, gives a patch on the stender, and announces, Yankees 4, Boston 3, hip hip hooray! The Rav on the spot fainted. Literally fainted on the spot, went hiding under his stender. My father went up to the president and smacked him across the face. For this, my father considers it to be absolutely behavior which is beneath contempt from every single standpoint. We're talking about Yom Kippur, the day which is Kodesh Kadoshim, the holiest day of the year. And this gentleman behaved in a fashion that was, to my father, just molly skullduggery. And behavior was simply, as I indicated, no way that one could possibly repair. So that's how I grew up, in that kind of a setting. We benched. My father used to eat bread all the time. My mother also. I'm always on a diet, but they were always eating bread and benching. Their benching took 15 minutes. They would sing every benching. Unbelievable. And word for word, everything was done. And so this is what I grew up in, that kind of environment. My brothers, one brother passed away a number of years ago. He was a Menachem, Manny David. He was an accountant for 50 years. But he was a Baki B'Shas. He said the Daf Yomi at nighttime. He learned the Daf Yomi in the morning, the afternoon as well, in his office. And at nighttime, he said the Daf Yomi, complete Baki B'Shas. A number of times I went to Long Beach where he was for Shabbos, and he said the Daf. And one day he invited me to say the Daf, which I did, and then he promptly decided to pummel me and take good care of me in the Daf, which he knew far better than I did. So this is the environment. I have another brother, Rabbi David, well known, the Rebbe in the Mir Yeshiva for many, many years, the Tzaddik Malach Hashem Tzvakos, another brother in Chadera who's essentially a Ramat Beit Shemesh in the Hillel Yafa Hospital in Chadera for 35 years, and now is retired at Rosh and Shabbos Erevin. And Baruch Hashem, this more or less is our family, and my sister who lives in Maryland, and she was a professor of English literature, and this is more or less the family. We grew up in this kind of environment. It was a very, in many respects, an environment of Kedusha, of Tara, of Tznius. You will not believe the following statement I'm about to make. We didn't own a TV. How's it possible to have a family without a TV? My parents were opposed to it. My father felt that was Bittel's man, Bizbuz man. Why waste your time? More important to do other things, such as reading books. And we grew up on many, many different types of books. First, we learned in my father's home every Shabbos Shnayim Bikov Targum. We had no choice. It was Kofanos Hachem Rotzani. We were under coercion. And when we were 5 years old, already we were learning the Pasha with Targum Onkelos and Rashi, and went on for hours and hours. And we had to go to every shir that every Rav gave, even though we were way below Bar Mitzvah. We couldn't leave Bichlal for a moment. And my father also was someone who was competent in Shakespeare and competent in secular literature and knowledgeable in many areas. And then on Shabbos, often, for quote-unquote, what they call here in Israel, kef, to have some fun. We went to Botanical Gardens one Shabbos. The next week, we went to the Bronx Zoo. We had an arrangement with the people who actually ran the gatekeeper and what have you. We didn't have to go to the turnstile. And my father used to pay him in the middle of the week to take care of that problem. So my father wanted us to be introduced to the flora and fauna in Botanical Gardens and to have an idea of what's going on in the animal kingdom through the Bronx Zoo. And this is more or less what we were exposed to. And during the week, my father would take us to Museum of Natural History. We went to the Guggenheim Museum. We went to the Museum of Science. We're in the Hayden Planetarium. Every Monday and Wednesday, I have your mitzvah and donnerstag. This is all before my bar mitzvah. All this is taking place. And so this is the kind of chinuch that I received at a very young age. And anytime there was a shiur that was taking place, we were there. Any other Rav, and as I mentioned one Rav already, Rav Chalap, but there were many other fine Rabbanim, outstanding Rabbanim, Rabbi Avigdor Zipperstein, Zatzal, who later on actually became Rosh Yeshiva in Yeshiva Hasidus Al-Chanan, also had a shul, Rabbi Kusil Fuchs. This is a Rav that had a big influence on my life. He was a Rav in the Sons of Israel. That's a shul in the Bronx. And unfortunately, his wife and children were killed in the Holocaust and the Shoah. He escaped through miracles, through Siberia, all kinds of the Nazis. He was tortured, unbelievable what he underwent. He married an American woman, considerably younger than he was when he came to the United States. And he used to take me on Yom HaShoah to Brooklyn, outside of the Reform Temple. He wouldn't go into the Reform Temple, B'shum Panav Ofen, but they had, this is already in the 50s, where they had some concept of the Shoah and some sort of memorial service that took place, and he was in tears, completely crying. I'll never forget that. He also, at a very young age, Yom HaAtzmaut, my father Shalom thought Yom HaAtzmaut was a day that was monumental, because here we have the Rebbeinu Shem gave us a matana, the state of Israel. We have to recognize the matana, acknowledge it, be makir tov, show gratitude to that matana. My father on his own said chatzi hala without a bracha to davening, without any rabbanim. That was something, a hargosha that he felt, and I've also had that hargosha my entire life. And that's what I was raised on that kind of a diet. And my father, even though many in the yeshiva world don't completely agree with this kind of approach, but my father used to quote the Gemara. My father, on his own, all of didactics, started learning Gemara and everything on his own, basically. The Gemara says, Puk chazi ma'am advar. Take a look at what the average person, sometimes the average person has a hargosha that even people who are way beyond him from a scholarship standpoint don't have, and that's what my father had. Tremendous hargosha. As I said, his davening was Kodesh Kodashim, and everything about him was Kedusha. He was honest beyond belief. Yashrus, total yashrus. Everything has to be completely honest. Nothing under the table, no chas v'shalom, no type of any kind of sheker to my father was absolutely unconscionable, unacceptable under all circumstances. Very glad, very straight, listening to Rabbanim. So this is more or less the kind of background that I had. And even the Rosh Yeshiva that I was zocher to have, I'm a student of Yeshiva Rabbeinu Yisrael Chanan. I went to Yeshiva University High School. I went to undergraduate in Yeshiva University. And then I went to Rabbi Isaac Chanan Theological Seminary.
I want to interrupt. The Rav and I were talking in the car before we came. There's one specific story that I want the Rav to share.
So I have to say one story. This happened at the age of 13 years old, and I also was an avid basketball player. It's hard to believe that I was a sports aficionado, but so what I was at that age. So I would come to the yeshiva, to high school, the very first week of Yeshiva University High School. I came there very early in the morning, 5 o'clock in the morning. I thought I'll play some basketball or shoot some hoops. I think that's the colloquial expression. If I'm not mistaken, that's the vernacular. Anyway, so I would shoot some hoops. And of course, the place was empty, deserted, abandoned, not a soul to be found. But what was I worried about? I knew my chaver would be there about 6 o'clock or so before davening. I'm not suggesting there's any heter to play basketball before davening. I hold it's usher. But I was not so knowledgeable at that point in time in my life, and I did it on my own. Anyway, I'm looking for someone to watch my books because I'm very conscientious. I don't think I ever missed a shiur kimat in my entire life, neither in high school nor in college. I have talmidim once a week. They're no longer available. They're not to be seen because they're under the weather, because they have some sort of different types of aches. What the Shulchan Aruch calls in Hilchos Shabbos mechush ba'alma, which halachically has no status whatsoever. But whatever the case is, they seem to be suffering from these mechushim on an ongoing kind of basis. So anyway, so I'm looking for someone to watch my books. Not a soul is there. I go up into the library on the second floor, and I see a gentleman learning Gemara, a black Gemara, with a fiery red beard. And I go over to him and I say the following. I say, "The gentleman, would you mind guarding my books?" So he looks at me, this gentleman with a fiery red beard, with very sweet, kindly eyes and says to me, "What is my status? Am I a Shem Echinam? Am I a Shem Esacha?" I didn't have a clue what the man's talking about. Who's a Shem Echinam? Who's a Shem Esacha? He said, "Oh, I see you're not familiar with Parshas Mishpotim. Setz dich havek, sit down, and I'll explain to you what these halachas are." I wasn't exactly in that kind of a mood. My basketball partners were waiting for me. And that was much more significant than this gentleman, fine as he may be, who wanted to introduce me to some basic laws in Chumash. He then proceeds to take out a Chumash. He finds one for me as well and teaches me the Parshas Hashomrim in Parshas Mishpotim. This must have gone on for a half hour. Shem Echinim, Shem Yisachar, Seichel and Shoyel. And then we go through Rambams and Gemaras. I wasn't kimat conscious or sentient to anything that he said. My mind was just on, this guy is taking away my basketball time. He has a Psali Adin of a Gazlan. I don't know what else I would consider him to be. But that's what I was thinking at that point in time. After 1 hour, he's finished. He says, "All right, it looks like I will not receive any compensation for this. I am a Shem Echinam." I said, "You're Don Tootin, but because of you, I have to daven now, and I'm not able to play basketball." Anyway, he didn't say a word. He takes my books, and I go on my merry way with my tefillin and go to daven. And then at one point, I see that he's more or less in that building, saying a shir in that building. And when he's not saying a shir, he is literally schlepping, that's the only term I could use, a lot of Gemaras, and why he has, Baruch Hashem, sometimes I had a handbag, sometimes a briefcase, sometimes a kind of satchel, and he's schlepping it everywhere, a knapsack. Wow, what a shomer. I never met such a wonderful shomer. I never met such a committed fellow who's so honest and so reliable and so trustworthy. Wow, what could be better? So I said to myself, I have a better idea. Instead of taking my svarim and each time taking them back from him, the whole satchel, the knapsack, no. I have different courses. I have a Gemara course. I'll take the Gemara from him and leave the rest with him. I'll take the science book, the math book, whatever's necessary the whole day. And this goes on the entire day. And he has no problem. Every time he sees me, he stops. Which sefer would you like to take now? And I just take out the sefer, and he goes on his merry way carrying all my svarim. I didn't realize how horrendous this behavior was, but I was really very innocent. I was a tam, total tzmimus. I did it really b'tzmimusi, v'ani b'tumi elech, as David HaMelech says. Anyway, so this goes on for 3 days. On the 4th day, in the middle of the week, another rabbi who looks also very, very rather angelic in nature, that's the understatement of the year, with a long black coat and a long white beard, comes over to me and says, points to me and says, "Please come with me. I would like to discuss with you something in Yiddish. Kommt mit mir. Ich will reden mit euch. I want to speak to you." So I go over to the corner and tells me what's exactly going on over here. I says, "He's my shomer, that fellow. He's great. He's outstanding." He says, "He's your shomer? Do you know who that is? That's one of the Gedolim Ador, one of the Gedolim Rosh Yeshiva of our generation. Hagoyin Atzadik Abaron Alevi Soloveitchik." So I heard the name Soloveitchik, but I didn't know much about the Soloveitchik family at that point in time. And I knew that there were two brothers that were obviously golden nuggets, to say the least. And I didn't realize the one I was dealing with was Abaron Alevi Soloveitchik. So then he says to me, "You cannot appoint him as a shomer. He cannot be your shomer. It's not proper covered, not proper derech eretz, to treat Talmidei Chachamim, especially Gedolim Yisrael, in such a fashion." I said, "But he's a great shomer. He is someone that's totally reliable. Where can I find someone as good as he?" He said, No, you don't understand. He may be a great shomer and certainly a reliable person, but this can't be. Okay. So I very sheepishly take my svarim and my knapsack and my satchel back from Abaron Alevi Soloveitchik. He didn't ask me any questions, and then I begin to do what everyone's supposed to do, namely, schlep your books and svarim around the way you're supposed to do. Every student should do. Next day in the morning, he sees me and says, in Yiddish, "Was hat geschehen? What happened? How come you don't give me my svarim?" There was a whole procedure, and I thought I was doing a very good job. And then he quotes the Psukim, he quotes the Rambam, Hilchos Chiras. The Rambam says, Hilchos Chiras, Sharei Yaakov HaTzadik, Ovad B'chol Kocho. Yaakov, the great tzaddik, he more or less worked for Lavan, was not exactly a close chaver. Okay, it's true, mishpacha, consanguinity, but at the same time, not a close chaver. And he worked for him for many years. And what does the pasuk say? Hayisi bayom machalani chorev v'kerach ba'loyla v'atidat shnosim einoi. He worked in all kinds of weather. My father used to say that you have to go to shul no matter what happens. Beveis elokim nahalach berogish bet reish gimel shin. Barad, Ruach, Geshem, Sheleg. No matter what the environmental circumstances are, we're obligated to go to shul. That's what my father held, and that's how he trained us. And I kimat don't miss Tefillah b'tzibur unless it's a divine act. Literally, has to be min hashamayim, something which is way beyond my control, some volcanic, tempestuous Mount Vesuvius eruption. Only then will I miss Tefillah b'tzibur, where it's onis gomer l'chol hadeos according to everyone. Anyway, b'kitzur, he tells me Avram Soloveitchik, I was not a Pesheah. Hashem Echinim is only Chayiv Pshia. I did not commit any act of negligence. I gathered your books in my life. And he went on and on and on. And that was the first introduction. I then fell in love with Avram Soloveitchik. I never met such a personality like that. Clearly, Gadol Torah. I was too young to have any appreciation of that. But then I began to, once a week, he would give Sichot and Hashkafa Shmuzin. I would leave my shir in high school and go to that shir of Rabbi Avishai David. I wasn't the only one. There were 300 other people who also joined. He was a fantastic, very miragesh, moli regesh, full of emotion, full of pathos, full of excitement, pulsating from literally every fiber in his body. And I fell in love with him and had a connection with him till unfortunately, fortunately for him, unfortunately for Chicago, he left the yeshiva in order to start the yeshiva in Brisk in Chicago, but I had a kesher with him for a fair number of years, and that kesher actually remained for many, many years. I lived in the city of Toronto, Canada, and there his son-in-law, Hagoyin Atzadik of Fall Marcus, his Rebbetzin Soloveitchik, Hashem Shigir Rabbi Chasyam B'Shonim B'Neimim. She lives over here in Ramat Beit Shemesh. And so I had a kesher with him, and as a result, I had a kesher with Aman Levi Soloveitchik. I have a whole series of stories. Actually, some of these stories are found in a book that I was Baruch Hashem Zocher to author called "The Warmth and Radiance of Gedolim Yisrael." There are several other stories about Aman Levi Soloveitchik, but I fell in love with the God of Torah and saw what godless, not just in Torah, is all about, but godless in midos, sterling character which was so precious. And so, as I mentioned, the two brothers, the golden nuggets, even though they were markedly different one from the other, but at the same time, they became models. And many of these Rabbanim that was zocher to see in the Rosh Yeshiva, that was zocher to have, Rabbi Yitzhak Elchanan, I had a number of them, Rabbi Nissim Alpid Zatzal, Agoyin Rabban Lichtenstein Zatzal, the son of Rav Soloveitchik, and I was exposed to literally a fair number of such radiant individuals, radiant by their intellectual acuity and radiant in terms of their incredible character, literally sterling character, as I mentioned a moment ago, and people who are impeccable in every aspect, and these became my models and probably impacted my life more than anyone else, other than my parents, Alayhim Hashalom, who also undoubtedly had a major impact. The Gemara says, Chazal say, that if you enter a bosem, so then you enter a perfumery, you got to be perfumed. You got to obviously absorb some of that perfume. The Ramban actually alludes to this in Chumash, when the Ramban speaks about, if you recall, Lot actually grew up in the ambience and was ensconced in the environment of Avraham Avinu, but not sufficiently. He didn't sufficiently absorb from that kind of atmosphere. And as a result, his perspective was somewhat skewed, not completely mushlam, not totally mature in terms of the kind of development he should have undergone. And that's why, unfortunately, there's a separation between Lot and Avraham Avinu. He goes this way, and Avraham Avinu goes the other way. And later on, we know what happened in terms of the Hachnas HaSarchim, which Lot attempted to emulate the model they saw in the house of Avraham Avinu, but it wasn't the same kind of model because he himself was not at that level yet, had not achieved, and unfortunately was ready to throw Rahman al-Litzan, his daughters, to the rapacious hordes of Sodom. That's what the Ramban comments on in Chumash, quoting Psukim Tanakh and Yecheskel and the like. Anyway, B'kitzur, we see that these great, unbelievable role models, and my father Shalom also introduced me to Targum Unkelos, Nine Mikvah Echad Targum, which we did religiously every week. My father knew Unkelos ala Torah by heart, Baal Peh. And he felt we should also know Baal Peh. We didn't exactly have the same kind of thinking that he did, but we didn't have a choice. It was essentially, where the Rambam writes in Chuz Gershon, Perek Beis, Halacha Chaf, Keifun Os Hashem Eretzani. We had to agree, and we were more or less, shall we say, brought into acquiescence through my father's strategy and methodology. And Baruch Hashem, I think that now, years later, all of us appreciate that kind of chinuch that we receive, but I don't recommend using these kind of tactics today, because as we know, that each dor v'dorshav, dor v'chachamav, dor mechanchav, and the way the Zohar writes, HaTorah poshes surah v'lavesh surah, every door has to have a different approach, different methodology. Every zeitgeist needs a different, and the zeitgeist today requires clearly Ava mekalkel sashur. There's a Gemara in Saita. The Gemara says that when it comes to chinuch, small doiche yam mekarevet. You have to, with the left hand, push away, namely midas hadin, and with the right hand, you have to show rachamim. Today, we have to show enormous amounts of rachamim, and enormous amounts of love, and that's what the pasuk says. Mayim rabim lo yuchel lechabes asava unaharas lo yishtafua. Pasuk she'ashir mite ish kol hom beis of ava boz yavuzulo. So that's the ava that we have to show our talmidim, and that's really, I think, how my father and mother attempted to instill into us. And Baruch Hashem, it turned out, even though my parents wanted us, more my father wanted us to go into the science area. He's a Cooper Union graduate, and that's what he wanted us to do. And I actually majored in science to a large extent as an undergraduate. And then ultimately, three of us went on a different path, and we're all today, three brothers are, Baruch Hashem, two very prominent, one a prominent, he was a Dayan also, he has Chashem Mishpat Dayanas, and a Rav in a hospital, and my other brother, that's Rabbi Avishai David, and then my other brother, Rabbi David, who's a Rebbe in the Yeshiva for many years, and then there's the, shall we say, the lowest on the barrel, that's Avishai David, Baruch Hashem, who was Zeichet to be a Mechanech and a Rav, a Rosh Yeshiva, and Beis Hashem, HaKadosh Baruch should give us the Kehillas to continue this kind of approach and this kind of chinuch l'dorei doros, and that's all it's talking.
Oh, man. So, interestingly enough, I guess, the Rav keeps talking a lot about the interactions with Gedolim, as the Rav spoke about the Sefer that's over here, and this kind of channels into the topic of today of speaking about hard work when it comes to Yiddishkeit and Judaism. The people in the Gedol Yisrael from generations and generations, from what we've had in the past and what we have now, those are people that, in order to get to a high level of Torah and Yiddishkeit, you have to work hard. So through the interactions with the different Gedolim that the Rosh Yeshiva had from years and years and years, could the Rav speak a little bit about what that did to help the Rosh Yeshiva get to who he is today?
I'll start again with my father. My father was very into the work ethic. He felt my father couldn't handle bizbuz man, people squandering away time, frittering away time, not using time in a wise fashion. My father used to go to Chavetz Chaim Zatzal. Chavetz Chaim used to say, "Zeit is Geld," that time is money. And a person has to recognize at a very young age, and Baruch Hashem, we came to that recognition at a very young age, that Adam lo Amal Yulad. A person was created for Amal. The Gemara says in Megillah, the Gemara points out that Yagato Matzasa Tamin, the person who works, who strives to and toils in the world of Torah will be successful. And it's not a function of what people think, intellectual acuity, and one has to be an Eloi in order to be accomplished in Talmud Torah. It's completely incorrect. I mean, I think one of the proofs for this, one of the models for this, I'm an average fellow, average Kishronos, but I try, and Baruch Hashem, over the years, and my brothers as well, my entire family was very into trying to utilize their Kishronos, and Lefum Tzaira Agro, that's a Mishnah Pegavos. The Rambam also quotes the Halacha, that it doesn't really make a difference. Whatever socioeconomic situation, every Jew is obligated in the mitzvah of Talmud Torah. Kol echad b'Yisrael chayev likvah al zman, to be kovei zman in Talmud Torah, shenem v'agiso yom v'alayla, bein oni, bein osher, bein shalom, bein bal yisurin, that's Lashon Hara in Hilchos Talmud Torah. Whether one is healthy, whether one is not so healthy, everyone should be healthy in Klal Yisrael, B'yatz Hashem. But there's an obligation to toil, and a person who toils will succeed. And I've known in my lifetime both Rabbeim who are Iluyim, geniuses, super geniuses, Gdolei Olam, but their accomplishment came not only because of their IQ, but primarily and preeminently came as a result of their effort. They were mashkia, incredible energy. I saw from my Rebbe, Hagoin, Moran, unbelievable hasmada, incredible diligence and industriousness. And that, of course, sometimes manifests itself in lengthy shiurim of 4, 5, 6, 7 hours, till he figured out what's the pshat in this Tesis, in this Ramban, till he understood a difficulty in Chumash that he had, a difficulty in Tanakh that he had, a difficulty in the Sefer Machshava. He was unwilling to give up, to be mavater b'shum panav ofen. And of course, as we said at the time, we were the karbanos, as it were. We were the, unfortunately, the scapegoats. We were the sacrificial lambs. But at the same time, we saw what Amalo Shel Torah is all about. And that's exactly how all the Gedolei Yisrael that I knew, their incredible hasmada was something. But also, that hasmada ultimately led to a love affair with Torah. There was a romance with Torah. Not just an intellectual romance, it was an emotional romance. It was literally, Lule Torah Shashui Ozavarati B'Onyi. If not for Torah, I can't survive. Torah provides us with a guidepost, with guidelines. Torah gives us literally a direction in life. The world today is to a large extent topsy-turvy. I'm not going to go into that. That would take me far afield, and we'd, shall we say, be here probably the whole afternoon, which would be not fair to my wonderful hostess, to the Proctor family. But the fact of the matter is that I saw in the course of my lifetime that the Gedolim Yisrael that I was involved with, and Rabbanim that I was involved with, and Mechanchim, and that's how we can instill that into Talmidim as well. We can instill into Talmidim this ability to literally develop a love affair with Torah, to become emotionally bound up with it. I always maintain, I've said this many years, one of the questions that Mefarshim ask, many Mefarshim ask this question, why are the two Pashas Vaseres Adibros, Yisro and V'eschanan? If you look carefully, there's actually a piece about this in a sefer called Shraga, which I also authored. Now the second volume came out from Asad Rav Kook, so it's 2 volumes Al Torah, Shraga Al Torah. It's available, and there one of the questions that's posed is why the need for 2 Pashas.
We'll be right back to the episode with Rabbi Avishai David, but first I want to give a shout out to the sponsor of today's video, and that is Noble Custom Suits. Are you somebody that values your time? Everybody does, right? With that being said, I created a business about 1.5 years ago with a good friend of mine named Aaron Tuckman in America, where we come to your house, wherever you live, New York, New Jersey, Israel, and we sit down with you for an hour on your own terms, and we build a custom suit from scratch, for you for your next simcha or any special event that you have going on. So to learn more about Noble Custom Suits, check out www.noblecustomsuits.com. Feel free to send us an email, and we will gladly set up a consultation with you to make the greatest suit of your life for your next family simcha. Now it's time to get back to my episode with Rabbi David.
And there, one of the questions that's posed is why the need for 2 Pashas? And I came to a maskana many, many years ago that there, of course, I'm very into brisk dialectic and the like. Tzvei dinim, everything actually has a 2-pronged kind of element to it. So there are 2 prongs here. Yisro, more or less, is the intellectual, normative aspect of Torah. And there are many proofs to it. I'm not going to cite them right now. While V'eschana and the Ramban uses the language, Ramban both in his Perashal HaTorah, the Ramban claims there's both a mitzvah say, a positive commandment, and a lo say, a negative commandment. The positive commandment is to transmit the Torah to generations. That's what the pasuk says in the V'eschana. Torah mentions the obligation that we have to transmit the experience of Torah, the romance of Torah, the excitement of Torah, midor to door. That's a mitzvah say. There's also a lav that the Torah says, God forbid, that we should not forget the Torah that we learn. And so that is what the Ramban calls the Eish HaTorah. That's his language, because the Lashon of Eish is used recurringly throughout Pashat V'eschanan. So there's both the mitzvah say, a positive obligation to transmit the romance, the excitement of Torah, and that we can do. Every mechanech has the capability of doing it. Each person will absorb it at their own level, wherever they are, etc., etc. But every single Jew and Jewess is capable of coming to heights in their commitment to Torah, and thereby also in their commitment to mitzvahs and their avodas Hashem, and they'll become literally davuk in Hashem Yisbarach, and that's something which really is the ideal that one should strive for. So all this comes about as a result of literally toiling in Torah. There's no way. The Gemara says at the end of Huriyas, the Gemara has twice in Shas, but the Gemara says in Brachas and Huriyas, the Gemara says Sinai v'Okeharim. What about if I have someone who's a big baki and someone who's in Okeharim, someone who knows is very sharp in terms of his ability to put together svaras and different ideas and understand the back, more or less, what's behind the scene in terms of Rashi and Tosas and all the Rishonim. Which one is preferable? The Gemara says, Sinai v'Okeharim, Sinai Adif. Why? Hakol tzrich in the Gemara Dechatya. The Gemara says everyone needs the person who has a lot of tzvua, a lot of grain, a lot of information. But the Rishonim point out there in Huriyas, that's only with relevance to a din kedima. There are Mishnayos prior to that in Huriyas that speak about if there's an issue of Hatzalah. So who do you say first? The Sinai or the Okeharim? The answer is the Sinai, because he's got a lot of information under his belt. That information is very important for us. You want to know what to do. But ultimately, the one really that's more significant is the Okeharim. A good Rebbe should teach his Talmidim, number one, both. That's why they have 2 Sdarim in Yeshivas. One, they have an Iyun Seder, teach him how to think critically, how to think for himself, and not just to parrot that which other people say. One of the problems in our generation, it's become very uniform. Everything is black and white. And I happen to come from a world which not everything is black and white. There's a lot of gray out there. And that gray is very good, very important, and very significant. And we have to know how to make distinctions, discriminating distinctions, nuanced distinctions between Ayin A and Ayin B. That's what the world of Lumdus is all about. That's why our salvation once explained that the first bracha, B'chas HaShachar, Ashanasan Al-Sechet Vina, Lahavchin Ben Yom Ve'Loila. You have to know how to make havchanot. Havchanot are critical, nuanced, very, very subtle distinctions between Ayin A and Ayin B. That's what the world of Lumdus and the world of Limud Torah is all about. So that Havdalah, the Gemara says in Brachas also, in main Das Havdalah Minayin. If a person hasn't acquired the basic rudiments of Das, so he can't make these Havdalahs, he doesn't know how to make these distinctions. So that's really critical. The world is complicated, the world is complex. There are all kinds of Jews out there. They're all wonderful. And it's irrelevant what kind of kippah the person is wearing. You don't have to wear a kippah shchora in order to be a fine Jew. You can wear a kippah sruga, you can wear whatever type of head covering you feel is appropriate for you. And there are different hashkafis, and the way the Balei Musa say that v'anachnu lo neida ma navras Hashem b'boinu shama. We won't know what's going to be till after 120 years, and then when we get to the quote-unquote pearly gates, we'll have a better sense of where we are. But Benatayim, the Vilna Gaon writes that our obligation is l'samech et azulat. Our obligation is to be mesamech every single Jew. Every Jew should be besimcha. Every Jew should find his mandate, his tafkid, but it will only come. The prerequisite is amola, yigia. One has to actually work very hard. But kol echad lefi madregaso. Everyone based on the madrega, everyone based on where they are. They're working people. They are people who are learning. Working people is good. There's an obligation. I actually learned ksubas the entire masechta before I got married. Discovered that I have an obligation to support my wife, and that's what I've done my entire life. Because that is my chiyuv, that's an obligation, and that's a good thing. One could also learn Torah at the same time if one decides to devote oneself to limud HaTorah. There's an avrech or a rebbe. Ma tov u'madoyim halavai. We need wonderful rabbeim. We need wonderful mechanchim. We need wonderful Rosh Yeshiva, Magidei Shia, Dayanim, who can somehow revolutionize and excite the Torah world and the Jewish world. Each one, Kodai Chadavi Madrigaso, but it's all founded upon one underpinning, and that is Amal Shal Torah. One has to work, one has to strive, one has to work hard, and everyone is capable of doing that. No one can say, I'm not capable of working. Unfortunately, the way the pasuk says in Chumash, nirpim atem nirpim, or the way the Gemara says that atzlu shabachem, magaram lachem, atzlu shabachem. We were guilty of lassitude, guilty of laziness, of slothfulness. We weren't actually up to snuff, and we can be up to snuff. And the moment a person realizes that, and then you begin to become enamored of Torah, and you get into it, then you become a masmid, and that's the key. The key is hasmada, the key is diligence, as the Rambam writes, that's all Rishonim write, and that's something that every single Jew is capable of doing. Everyone is capable of achieving that level.
So I kind of want to touch on what the Rosh Yeshiva was saying a second ago, that each person has their level of learning, whether you're a full-time kollel guy, to whether you're somebody that works and balances everything. So on that topic, for somebody that, whether they have an hour a day to learn or they learn the entire day, where's the balance between hishtadlus and emunah in your learning of when somebody says, okay, I have a daf to learn, and I'm going to learn it this amount of times, review it this amount of times, and I'm going to leave the rest to Hashem so that I remember the rest? Or is it put all effort?
I think one has to be realistic, and that's an important important concept. Namely, everyone has to know where they're at, and everyone has to know Ma chovaso shel adam ba'ilamo, the way the Mesilas Yesharim writes, and the way many Musasrim, Rishonim, Achronim write. One has to know exactly where I am. That is to say that we have all responsibilities. There are married people, there are single people, there are people with children. We have to obviously carry out our responsibilities and shoulder them properly. A married person has obligation to his wife, to his family. Those are clear dinim. It's not only mentioned in Maksuba, it's mentioned in many Gemaras, and there's an obligation to, in effect, be mesameach one's wife and one's children. That takes a lot of time and a lot of effort, a lot of careful thinking. There's also an obligation to learn Torah, that one should be koveitim. But one is koveitim, that's the mitzvah. The Rambam says in Hilchos Talmud Torah, doesn't say the mitzvah is to learn Torah. The mitzvah is likvoa itim la Torah. Shenema b'gisa b'yom v'layla. To set aside fixed hours during the day and night to learn Torah, but one has to do so with a sense of reality. One has to do so knowing all the constraints. One has to be realistic. Don't live in some ideal, dreamlike kind of world which is not founded upon, not grounded in reality, but one should try to think carefully what one is capable of doing, whether you learn b'chabrusa, whether you learn by yourself, whether you're involved with some sort of a shir that you give, which is also a great thing because it gives you the opportunity and the obligation to express yourself, to articulate ideas in a coherent, clear kind of fashion, which is really what Talmud Torah ideally is what's all about. So every single person has to make choices and sometimes a person can learn 15 minutes a day, and that's the extent of it. But that's what he should be koveh, that should be Kodesh Kodashim. Those 15 minutes a day should be, without any exception whatsoever, never be mavater on those 15 minutes. If someone can learn an hour and a half a day, of course, that's far better. That's far superior. But every person has the ability to connect to Torah. And when I say Torah, lav davka Gemara. Not everyone is connected to a blood Gemara. Sometimes a person is connected more to Machshava. He enjoys going through Kuzari, through Rabbi Levi Kuzari, which is a fantastic sefer. He enjoys Absadigo and the Emunah Sedes. He likes the Moreh Nevuchim. He likes maybe even more, quote-unquote, modern kind of philosophic works that are not exactly on that kind of level. Good, that's what he should pursue. Or he should pursue learning Tanakh. The Gemara says the Gemara says that in Brachas, in the 4th parak, Minu b'nechem and ayigoyon. So that's Rashi. Al targilim b'mikra. But Rashi adds 2 words. Yoter midai. Don't learn too much mikra, but 24 svarim of Tanakh, Chavdal, Kishutim, every time Chacham has to have. So you have to learn Tanakh. Tanakh is exciting, exceptional, beautiful, beyond belief. There are Yeshivat in Tanakh that one could draw from Mefarshim, from Midrashim. There are people who like to learn Midrashim. And there are people who are not even in any of the above and are involved in Chesed. People are Bali Chesed Mufloyim. They do Chesed for Klal Yisrael, that there's nothing comparable to it. And Chazal actually tell us that Torat Chilasa Gemilas Chasadim. It's a Gemara. V'Sova Gemilas Chasadim. The Torah begins with Gemilas Chesed, ends with Gemilas Chesed. The beginning, Hashem, Vayas Hashem, Elokim La'adam, U'Ishto Kos Nasor, Vayabishem. And at the end, Vayikbar Osor Bagai Be'eretz Moav, Hashem buried Moshe Rabbeinu, V'Yoda Ish Es Kurosor Arayom Hazeh. Torah begins with Chesed and ends with Chesed. Chesed is the Olam Chesed Yiboneh. The Ramban and Chumash and the Mekubalim speak a lot about the world of Chesed, which is really everything. Torah, the Gemara in the 4th parak of Sukkah, speaks about Torah's Chesed al Lashona, what we sing on Friday night. Torah's Chesed al Lashona. There's Torah Shal Chesed, Torah Sheno Shal Chesed. So ultimately, even Torah is bounded with Chesed. So whatever particular area a person feels an affinity for, ideally should try to learn in some form or fashion. All the different areas that I just outlined, that I just delineated. But if a person even is not capable of that, but is involved in Jewish community, Osig b'tzorchei tzibur be'emunah, HaKadosh Baruch Hu yishalim scharam, v'yasem mem kol machla, v'yipol l'chol gufa, v'yisad l'chol avonam, the Rebbeinu will send him bracha v'atzlacha, b'chol masi yedeyim. Chesed is the very superstructure. It's a very matrix. Chesed is undergirds the entire universe. And Hashem is about Chesed Mufla. And Mahu Afata, the Gemara said that Afyudala, the Gemara said that we have to imitate Odei. Whatever Hashem does, we have to do. Mahu Goma Chasonim, Avata Goma Chasonim. Mahu Merachim Avelim, Avata Nacham. Mahu Mevakir Cholim, Avraham Avinu, Vayera. Hashem came to Vakir Choleh. So that's we have to follow the Darkei Hashem, the attributes of Hashem. And Chesed is one of the major attributes of Hashem is Barach. And that's really what all of us are obligated to do. Some more, some less. And the areas of learning that I described earlier. And of course, one should be medactive b'mitzvahs. The more one is medactive b'mitzvah, Chaim Voloshin writes in Never Shachayim, that the greater one is in terms of keeping mitzvahs and observing the Ratzon Hashem, then Hashem himself will vouchsafe to us a cornucopia. He himself will go out of his way to do chesed for us, to do wonderful things. As a letter of Rabbi Kiva writes in the Gemara Sanhedrin that the pasuk says that it speaks about Toda Yechabdonini, and Rabbi Kiva has a yesod. He says the more a person is makir tov, the more a person shows gratitude to Hashem Yisbarach for things that Hashem has done for him, Hashem will then give you more bracha in order that you should have more akar satov. And that will lead to more bracha and more akar satov. So one midah feeds upon another. And on question, when we say b'midah shanamodi, modu din lo, that's also understood, the Mishnah in Pirkei Avos, that Ribbon Shalom, it's reciprocity, reciprocal relationship. We act in a proper way. We are Goma Chesed. We are Nabali Chesed. We are Makir Tov. We do wonderful things for our neighbors, for our parents, for our brothers, for our sisters, for our Talmidim, for all the Klal Yisrael. Hashem will, in effect, respond to us as well. As a matter of fact, I just felt the need to be Makir Tov for what I consider to be one of the greatest nisim, if not the greatest, that I witnessed in my lifetime in Eretz Yisrael, the last 29 years. What happened here on Motzei Shabbos, with all the missiles and drones that were thrown at us by the Iranians, and their intention is clear. Lahashmid, Larog, Abid is called Yehudim in Aviad Zokin. Or the way the Ramban is B'dayik, Tzorer, Kol Yehudim. The Iranians couldn't care less where we are, and the Ribbon Shalom, in his wondrous chesed, was Merachim and Klal Yisrael. Not a hair of one Jewish person was singed. Unbelievable. And I said that morning, Sunday morning, I said the entire Hallel without a bracha. And I said, Nishmas Kol Chai. I was so overtaken by this unbelievable chesed of Hashem. I even started singing and dancing, which is not exactly where I am. But b'chol I did it privately, so no one could see me, no one could report me. But this certainly was roi for rikudim, for simcha she'ein kamo. I was astounded. As a matter of fact, I met someone literally the day after, and I was telling him, wow, Nisem. So he told me, Kvod Harav, we're accustomed to this in Eretz Yisrael. Baruch Hashem, that's gewaldik, that we are rogel b'nisim. But I told him, Chazal se'ein bal hanes makeh b'niso. The bal hanes doesn't always recognize the nes that Hashem did. This nes to me was as big as Kriyas Yamsuf, literally, as big as Kriyas Yamsuf, that they fly 2,000 miles with all this 60 ton of, I don't know what, weaponry that could be destructive, Rachmana litzlan, and the Rebbeinu Shalom b'chazdo agadol. So the more chesed we do, the more learning we do, the kinder we are, the more midos that we display, then Hashem Yisbarach will respond in turn. That's clearly a function of B'midah Shad Modeh Den Lo, Midah Keneged Midah. The Gemara has in Saita also, and the Psukim in Pasha Saita, based on that idea of Midah Keneged Midah, and that's how we have to try to behave in the most exemplary, sweet, generous kind of fashion, and Hashem will respond in turn.
So I really wanted to touch on a specific kind of aspect of what we've been discussing, kind of, towards the Rosh Yeshiva's life in a personal way, that, the Rav is a, the Rav of a shul, and also the Rosh Yeshiva of Shraga, and also has a personal life, and also wants to learn, right? So, and we were in the car before we came, and the Rosh Yeshiva showed me, he was like, there's 16, missed phone calls just in the past hour alone. So how does the Rosh Yeshiva balance his own avoda and learning, while also the needs of a Kehillah and also Yeshiva, and kind of take me through the avoda?
The answer probably is that I'm not successful. Certainly not to the extent that I would like to be. But I heard many years ago from my Rebbe, Hagoyin Amisim Albert Zatzal, also one of my most beloved Rabbeim, had a connection with him for 21 years. I almost didn't move without him. My father taught me Aseh L'Charav. He taught me that principle. And so he told me, if I become a Rav, and I'm in Rabbanos over 50 years of my life, if I become a Rav, he told me, don't have hours, half hour in the morning, half hour at night. That is not a Rav. A Rav has to be available 24/7. B'li Esech Hadas from his community, from people who call him, people who ask him shilas, who want hadracha, want direction, want guidance. That's what a Rav is. So I tried my best. I'm clearly nowhere near that ideal, but I try my best to fulfill that dictum to the extent that I can without getting frustrated. And certainly there's a lot of room for frustration in the rabbinate and in being a Rosh Yeshiva. But the truth of the matter is I happen to enjoy people. I'm a people person. And I feel that if I can be mesamech someone and help someone, why shouldn't I do so? Now, you ask the question, how do I juggle all this? The answer is, I really don't. And I'm not, as I indicated, I'm not always successful, but I'm also someone who does not waste any time. And I have to be, Baruch Hashem, I have a koach hasmada in me, and don't do the kinds of things that other people feel constrained to do. Namely, everyone wants to have a good time, wants to relax. That's not part of my culture, not part of my calculus. My relaxation is when I really am in a state of ennui. So then what I'll do is take out a Ramban al Torah and learn the Ramban. That will give me relaxation, and that will give me some sense of comfort and some sense of nechama. Otherwise, I try to learn as much as I can. But there's something else that I do which really is probably most compelling. I say a lot of shiurim. I have Yitzhahara to say shiurim. Now, I can't say people have Yitzhahara to listen to my shiurim, but I have Yitzhahara to say shiurim. So I say many, many shiurim a week, both in the yeshiva and in my shul. Shiurim in every single area imaginable, in halacha, in Gemara, in Tanakh. I even say a shir in Lashon HaKodesh to several more Israeli-minded type of people who would like to have in that language. And I say Iyun Shir on the Daf HaYomi on Friday morning, and I say on Thursday night a Shir on the Parsha, and on Sunday night I say a Shir in Halacha. This year I'm learning Hilchos Brachas, and on Sunday and Tuesday morning I have a kollel for 12 Balabatim who come to learn with me as well, and then the many Shurim in the Yeshiva, and I spend a lot of time talking in the Yeshiva, doing Sach Nashim, Sichot Nefesh, schmoozing with Talmidim, which is really, in many respects, really, you can learn a lot about Talmidim when you schmooze with them, when you connect with them, and then they'll listen to you, then they'll come to your Shurim. Otherwise, if you have no connection with them, why would they come? So all this requires enormous amount of juggling, as I indicated 2 or 3 times already. I'm not as eminently successful as I want to be, but the fact that I have to say shiurim compels me to prepare them. It's a mechayev for me, and once I have that mechayev, that forces me to learn, and in many areas, and Baruch Hashem, I'm able to somehow manage to the extent that I can, even though it's not an optimal, ideal world, and it's certainly something which is challenging, but we try our best to rise to the challenge.
So on the topic that the Rosh Yeshiva was saying of how, balancing everything, and, every person in their own regard in life, as we were speaking about before, has their balance, whether it's their job, their family, whatever it may be. What would the Rosh Yeshiva's advice be to someone to help them essentially reach their goals in Talmud Torah when, the world is crazy, they have a whole life, it's busy, it's hectic? So what would the Rosh Yeshiva's advice be to help somebody reach their goals in Yiddishkeit with everything going on in their life?
Again, one has to be, as I mentioned earlier, set down goals that are realistic. Don't set out goals that are just pie in the sky, that are simply not realizable, not attainable, not doable. Try to examine your life objectively, dispassionately, see what you're capable of doing, and then go about doing it. But of course, it has to be with a plan, with a strategy, what I'm going to learn, when I'm going to learn, when I'm working, when I'm with my children, when I'm with my family, when we're having a good time together. And that's what we have to do. Today, we have to give our children a good time. If we don't do that, chas v'sholom, we will lose our children. We want to develop their self-esteem. And the way to do it is by spending enormous amounts of time with them. The world out there is very frightening, very menacing, very dangerous. More or less, I would say it's Anachnu me'ever echad v'kol ha'olam me'ever hasheni. We're on one side and they're on the other side. Our values are completely different. Their values are inimical, completely, totally antithetical to everything we stand for, and therefore we have to now plan accordingly. So now a young man has to try to put it all together in terms of, as I mentioned, be objective about analyzing how much time he has, but there's something else that really has to be developed, a sense of bitachon, a sense of emunah in Hashem Yisbarach. He's the one who guides our life. I honestly and firmly believe kol man di'aver rachman l'tov avet. I've seen it. The only advantage I have over anyone else is perhaps age before beauty, and with age comes a bit of experience. And there is such a thing called chachma, that zaken misha kana chachma, someone acquires wisdom, life's wisdom. I had an aunt who was elderly. She decided to go to university, to go to college. They gave her half the credits because of her age, life's experiences. That's a Gemara in Kedushin. I don't know if they knew that Gemara. The Gemara says, that he saw an older person, a non-Jew. He stood up for that non-Jew. He underwent many of life's experiences, and that alone is a reason to stand up for that person. So if one develops emunah and bitachon, namely, the one has to be not become flustered, not become frustrated, not lose your sense of equanimity, not lose your homeostasis, but remain solid, anchored, and in a calm kind of fashion. I am not the calmest person in the world, that's for sure. I'm surrounded by all types of challenges, literally from every nook and cranny, every dollar amis, every 10 minutes. Another challenge comes my way, but over the years, Baruch Hashem, I've developed a kind of solidity, and with that solidity, and that requires learning Musa Svarim, and learning Svarim and Machshava, and literally that's something very significant today. And even reading stories, I'm very into stories about Gedolim Yisrael. I think that all of us should read them and see how people learn how to behave under all different types of trying circumstances. And if one develops that emunah, that bitachon, and that sense of trust that Hashem does everything. I'll give you an example. When Talmidim ask me, how do I know God exists? This is not an uncommon question from 18, 19, 20-year-old Talmidim. I have many answers. I can give them philosophic proofs, which they're not exactly into. So I try to avoid that, unless you have someone of unusual stature, intellectual stature. But I tell them a number of basic things. Number one, I tell them, do you know that Donald Trump was elected president of the United States almost a decade ago? How could that possibly happen under normal circumstances? The answer was Yad Hashem. Clearly, the Rebbeinu Shalom intervened, and even though he's sort of out of the box, that's the understatement of the year, Ubechol, he was elected president. Why? Because clearly he had what to do here in the state of Israel. Namely, I'm talking about the embassy, I'm talking about Iran, I'm talking about the Golan Heights. So many different wonderful things, and that's the Yesod of the Beis Halevi. I say over this Yesod many, many times. I heard it from my Rabbi Avishai David Zatzal decades and decades ago. Namely, why was the United Nations established? Only for one reason. This is in Kol Dodi Dofek. Very, very famous, fundamental, basic article of Emunah. Namely, that there he writes that there's a concept called, Beis Halevi developed this, Siba Misovav, cause and effect. Everything that happens in the world, we have to try to figure out what was the cause of the phenomena that we see, and what was the effect. So he gives the example of Beis Halevi in his parish on Miketz. Torah describes the beginning of Miketz, Vayi Miketz Nasayin Yomim Uparo Cholem, V'nei Omed Ali Or. Paro becomes suddenly a dreamer. When did that happen? So the Medrash writes, it's not that Paro suddenly became a dreamer, but rather the end of Vayeshev, the Torah says that Yosef was imprisoned for an extended further period of time, and he relied upon the Sarah Mashkim. And Rashi, there are several explanations, quoting Psukim in Tanakh. So because of that, he was stuck there. Now the time came, says the Medrash, for Yosef to be released from incarceration. As a result, Paro becomes a dreamer. Not Punk Fakir, not the other way around. Not that the cause was Paro dreaming and now the effect is Yosef being released. No. The time came for Yosef to be released from incarceration. As a result, Paro had a dream. And now we have the entire, literally, saga that now goes on its merry way. Namely, ultimately, the dream. Yosef becomes the Mishnah Melech Mitzrayim, the viceroy to the king of Egypt. And then ultimately, Klal Yisrael come down to Mitzrayim. And ultimately, Klal Yisrael, Baruch Hashem, this goes back actually to the Bris Min Absorim. Yodah Teda, Ki ger yeh za'acha v'yeretz lo lohem, v'avodu v'ino sa v'ava me'yoshona, v'gam es hagoyah she'avodu daronochi, v'achachein yetzer b'chush gadol. So that was a promise given to us, but we didn't know how that's going to play play out. And now it begins to play out the entire saga, and ultimately Matan Torah, and we're in Har Sinai, and the ultimate Eretz Yisrael, which of course is the, shall we say, the ultimate goal of every single Jew. And Baruch Hashem, we were zorged to come to Eretz Yisrael. But coming back to the Yesod of the Beis Halevi, which is cause and effect. So here he says, you might have thought that the cause of what happened with Yosef is the dream of Paro, v'chulu v'chulu, to quote Rabbi Soloveitchik, Geschichte ihm gedreht auf den Kopf. It's just the opposite. Punkt verkehrt. The opposite, exactly. The reason why Paro had a dream is because Yosef had to be released from incarceration, and Yosef had gone his merry way to be the Shliach of Klal Yisrael and Mitzrayim, and ultimately, Ki lemichyo shalchani el kim lefnechem, and that enabled us to ultimately go to Eretz Yisrael, etc., etc. So that's called what the cause, what the effect is. So I say the same with Donald Trump, that people think that Donald Trump, because of all of his, how shall we say, histrionics, and because of his personality, which is colorful to say the least, and the like, swashbuckling and everything else, that's the reason why he was elected president. Incorrect. He was elected president of the United States in order to enable those of us living in Eretz Yisrael to be nene, namely Golan Heights, I mentioned before, and the embassy and the Iranian debacle, which he fought basically to, and we see today what that was all about. He was almost a kind of Navi. Chazal say, Nevuah is given today to Shaitim, Gemara Babasa, the first parak. Anyway, so the fact of the matter is that what is the cause and what is the effect? The answer is, the cause is that Hashem Yisbarach had all kinds of very, very significant elements, components that had to be taken care of in Eretz Yisrael. And in order to enable that to happen, Donald Trump had to be elected. Only he could have stood up to the entire world and done what he did. So that again is the Yesod of the Beis Halevi. And I see this in my entire life. Even everywhere I've gone, I like to think that perhaps I'm the one who's in control. I'm in control of zero, zilcho, nada, efes, goose eggs. The Rebbeinu Shalom is completely in control. He's directing traffic. I see that in my life. And I can go through my life, but I'm not going to do that now. But anyway, I see that every step of the way. It was all to enable me to get to Eretz Yisrael. And Baruch Hashem, here we're Zeiche to live in Eretz Yisrael. Again, to my mind, Eretz Yisrael is safer than any other location in the entire world. And Hashem is Baruch should continue to bring Yidden from all over the world to Eretz Yisrael. And we should be able to, Beis Hashem, to build a country that's founded upon Torah and mitzvahs. And Beis Hashem, try our best, Beis Hashem, to carry out the dream of Tanakh, which ultimately has its really anchor here in Eretz Yisrael.
Oh man, I want to end kind of with a question to the Rosh Yeshiva that I think there's a lot of advice that people could take from what we've spoken about. But if there was one specific piece of advice that the Rosh Yeshiva could give to anybody who's listening to this, that was like, take this message in a bottle, put it in your pocket, and take with you wherever you go for the rest of your life, what would that message be?
I would say, Aseh lecha Rav, make for yourself a Rebbe. Let there be someone who could be your model. Doesn't have to be one person, could be a number of people. Today it's hard to find one role model, one Rav who's going to fulfill somehow all of these elements. But if you unquestionably see someone who's a model, whether it's a Rebbe, whether it's a father, whether it's a mother, could even be a sibling, could be a brother, could be a sister, could be a chaver, a friend that you have. But these are people who somehow have succeeded. Jump on the bandwagon. And try your best to emulate them, to emulate the qualities that they have displayed, that they have demonstrated, that they have proven to be successful in their lives. So I, to a large extent, did it with Aseh lecha Rav, but probably my parents were most impacting and most influential, even though I didn't appreciate it at the time. But now looking back at it, l'mafreya, in hindsight, of course, I have a different perspective, but also, as I said, I was zocheh to Rabbeim who completely changed my lives. And I literally, pardon the expression, stalked them to a large extent. That's what I describe in this sefer of mine. Gdola Shimusha Shel Torah Yosef Limuda. The Akdama, the preamble, is a whole lengthy essay on that topic. Namely, I'll just mention the Ramban in Chumash, Ramban writes in Chumash in the Parsha Kehillas, that here Yoshua and Moshe Rabbeinu are descending from the mountain, and they have the same perspective. And Yoshua tells Moshe Rabbeinu, Kol Milchama B'Machane. It looks like there's a war going on. This, of course, is before the Cheder Egel. Moshe Rabbeinu said, no, it's not a war. Kol Anot Anochi Shomeh. So he quotes the Targum Onkelos Rashi, that is, Kol Chirufu V'Giduf V'Klapi Mala. They're involved in blasphemy. So the Ramban quotes the Medrash. The Medrash asks, how did Moshe Rabbeinu know and not Yoshua? The answer is Moshe Rabbeinu, said the Ramban, he writes that he is a Manig Yisrael. Umavchin ben kol lekol. He can make a distinction. He has experience in life and with people, and he went through the gauntlet, and as a result, he was able to develop literally a world of experiences vicariously and directly. Yeshua didn't have that yet. He was still what someone considered to be a neophyte, someone who actually is a newcomer to the scene, and that takes time. So a person, little by little, a person grows. That's why in my days, I had only older Rosh Yeshiva. The Rosh Yeshiva I had were all rather elderly chaps, even some octogenarians who are my Rosh Yeshiva. And I gained tremendously from them. Today, that's not in. Youth is in. And I say youth is wasted on the young. To a large extent, they don't have the kind of experience or the kind of background or the kind of even intellectual wealth that the Rabbeim I had. So that's a bit of a unfortunate element. But whomever they are, whomever you decide to go ahead and model yourself after, I think this is a wonderful guidepost in light, the navigational tool, a GPS, Aseh L'Charav. Let there be some model. It doesn't have to be Dafka Rebbe. Could be even a person in the business world, people, Baruch Hashem, in the business world who are outstanding people, honest people, workaholics, people who, Baruch Hashem, have midos and wonderful character traits that we should certainly, that they exemplify, that we should emulate, that we should try to follow to the extent that we can. So this is one of a number of drachim, and I think that's one of the drachim that my family followed, and Baruch Hashem, as a result, we were zocheh to whatever modicum of success that we had, and Halavai, everyone else should be matzliach in their own way, and all the Klal Yisrael should only have hatzlachu bracha b'chol masiyadich.
I mean, I just want to say something about the Sefer the Rosh Yeshiva mentioned a second ago, how when the Rosh Yeshiva was young, he would stock different, the Rav can hold this. We'll speak about it for a second, but the Rosh Yeshiva used to stock Gedolim, and that's a large portion of what the Sefer is. So maybe if the Rosh Yeshiva could explain a little bit of, what went behind the Sefer, where people maybe could get it, and a little bit on the Sefer.
As I said, my parents had such derech eretz for Rabbonim and great Torah personalities, Torah giants. That sort of, I absorbed that osmotically in my youth as a very young man. And my father used to take us to see Gedolim Yisrael. We were very, very young. We were 8, 9, 10, 11 years old. He felt there was a need, even if we didn't understand what they're saying, but let's just see the Rabbeim in front of you and see their virtues and see their pluses and see what they bring to the table and try your best to see what you can do to emulate that. And that's essentially what we did to a large extent. And as a result, as a very, very young man already, I began that kind of connection with the Gedolim Yisrael. I think I mentioned also in the Sefer as well that I was zocheh when I first came to Eretz Yisrael. I said to myself, I need a Rebbe. So who am I going to find? Someone that I could respect and someone who could understand where I'm coming from. And I had difficulty finding that person. And finally, I found the Rav of the Yer Atikah, Yerushalayim, Agon Avigdor Nebensoul Shlita, Shashem Yarech Yama Ben Imim, and I found him, and I went to a sicha, to a shmuz that he gave. There were 5 people in the sicha, in the Kehillas Yeshivat HaKotel. And he was introduced to me by Chaver Yedid Nefesh Hamayim, Harav Chanoch Tel Shlita, I know for decades, and he was also part of that group, and there were 5, 6 of us, that's it. And then after the first sikha, I went for a half hour. I was very taken aback by this man who clearly was knowledgeable, encyclopedic knowledge in Kol Torah Kula. I asked him if I could walk with him. I saw he takes a walk around the old city after the shmuz, after the sikha. So he said, no problem. But he said, I don't really need any escort. But if you want, you can. And so I did that for 8 years. I escorted him around the old city from approximately 10:30 to 12 o'clock one night a week. And I did it for 8 years straight. And I got to really connect with him in many, many different ways, in many different respects, and I fell in love with him. I was so enamored of his personality, of his sterling midos. What a unbelievable Malach Hashem Tzvokos, what an angel. And someone with incredible knowledge, and he's a Talmud Muvak of Avsham Zalman Auerbach. And that you see also, I never saw him not smile. The smile is literally etched on his face perpetually. He is such a happy person, no matter what happens. And of course, he has also underwent even difficulties in his life, personal difficulties and other kind of difficulties, and yet there's that perpetual state of simcha. I try my best, even though I'm sort of connected a little bit to Brisk, and often they have the opposite kind of position, and but they're primarily in that kind of physiognomy because they're always worried about maybe they don't understand this pshat and tesis, maybe they didn't do a mitzvah properly, so they have this yashamayim, which is really magnified 10,000 times different ways. But I saw in Rabbi David this kind of unbelievable yeshivadas, minucha, simchas hachayim, and that's the ideal that one has to strive for, and that's what all of us should try our best, Mitzvah Hashem, to emulate, these Gedolim Yisrael, and try, as I said, bitachon and emunah, to cultivate, nurture those elements with simcha, with tremendous joy, and Yetz Hashem, Rebbeinu Shalom will give us siyata d'shmaya.
Oh man, I just want to thank the Rosh Yeshiva so much for taking the time, and anybody to buy the Sefer, where could they find it?
I am selling the Sefer, I myself, in my home here in Ramat Beit Shemesh. I don't have that many copies left, but it's available in the Svarim stores, and Yetz Hashem, please, as they say, Yochlu Anovim Yizbo, what they say on the flights. You can have your meal, and also, Yetz Hashem, enjoy the meal. Beis Hashem, to my mind, this is better than a meal. And so I hope you enjoy these stories by Gedolim Yisrael, Yetz Hashem, and those who have a chance to purchase it or to find it, Yetz Hashem, halavai, they should be nene, have a lot of hana from it.
Oh man, thank you so much, Rosh Yeshiva. Thank you guys so much for watching today's episode with Rabbi David. As you guys see, I have the book that Rabbi David alluded to at the end of the episode called The Warmth and Radiance of Gedolei Yisrael. I've heard a lot of these stories actually during my time at Shraga, and Rabbi David put it in this Sefer, and it has haskamas from people like Rav Shechter, Rav Willig, and other Gedolim, and they actually read through the Sefer, Rabbi David was telling me after we got off camera, and it's awesome. So if you guys have a chance to check this out, you guys can find it in different Svarim stores. I'm not sure exactly where you guys live who's listening to this, but if you can get your hands on the Sefer, it is very, very kedai and a great Shabbos read. So thank you guys so much for watching today's episode, and we look forward to seeing you next week.